Everyone assumed the hardest part of Justine's wedding day would be the nerves. They were wrong. The hardest part walked through a side door at 1:22 in the afternoon, wearing a navy suit, carrying a small wooden box, and wearing an expression that nobody in that ballroom had ever seen on his face before. Not confidence, not arrogance, not the electric, restless energy that filled every room he had ever entered. Something quieter than all of that. Something that looked, to the people close enough to see it clearly, remarkably like a man who was finally, after a very long time, doing the right thing. His name did not need to be announced. 312 people recognized him without it. And in the 47 seconds it took for the entire room to understand what they were looking at. Not one person, not the groom, not the bride's closest friend, not the musicians, not the children in the back row, made a single sound, because some moments are too large for sound. This was one of them. The moment Elon Musk walked through the door of the Broadmoor Hotel in Colorado Springs, the music stopped. Not because someone turned it off, it just stopped. A string quartet had been playing in the corner of the grand ballroom. 4 musicians in black suits. They had been playing Pachelbel's Canon, the same piece that had floated through weddings in that room for 40 years. But when the violinist closest to the side door looked up and saw who had just walked in, her bow froze in the middle of a note. Not at the end. In the middle. The sound cut off like a snipped thread. Then the cellist noticed. Then the other two. And then the whole room went quiet. And the way rooms go quiet in moments that no one planned for and no one knows how to handle. The kind of quiet that has weight to it. 312 people turned their heads. Elon Musk stood just inside the doorway, wearing a simple navy suit. No tie. His hair was slightly pushed to one side, the way it looked in candid photographs taken when he wasn't performing anything for anyone. He had come alone. No security visible. No assistant trailing behind him with a phone and a schedule. No cameras. Just a man standing still in a room full of people who could not believe he was there. He was holding a small wooden box in both hands, about the size of a shoebox. Sanded smooth, the color of pale walnut, sealed with a single brass latch on the front. He held it the way you hold something fragile. The way you hold something that matters more than it looks like it does. He did not smile. He did not wave or nod or perform any of the gestures people perform when they walk into a room and want to make it easier for everyone. He simply stood there and let his eyes move slowly across the ballroom until they found what they had come here to find. At the far end of the room, at an altar made of white roses and trailing eucalyptus branches, stood Justine. She was already in her wedding dress. Cream silk, simple and unadorned. The kind of dress that looks effortless because it took a long time to choose. She had been mid-laugh at something her maid of honor whispered a second before, her head tilted back, completely at ease. The laugh was still on her face when she turned and saw him. It disappeared. Beside her stood Marcus Hale, the groom, a tall man with steady hands and kind eyes, an architect from Denver who had never once in his 48 years stood in the same room as Elon Musk. He looked at his bride. He looked at the man in the doorway. He looked at the wooden box. He did not move. Nobody moved. Near the back, a woman leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Is that actually him?" Her husband said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Elon took one step into the room, then another. He walked the way someone walks when they have rehearsed a moment so many times inside their own head that the real version feels slightly unreal. Slow, deliberate, like each step was a decision. He stopped about 10 feet from the altar. He looked at Justine. Justine looked at him. And then, in a voice quiet enough that only the first 4 rows would hear, Elon said, "I just need 5 minutes, then I'll go, I promise." In the wooden box he was holding, there was something that would change everything that came after this day. But no one in that room knew that yet. And to understand why that box mattered, why a man who had rockets orbiting the Earth and companies worth hundreds of billions of dollars drove himself alone to Colorado Springs on a Saturday morning and walked into his ex-wife's wedding holding a piece of wood with a brass latch. You have to go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the money, the beginning of the two of them. Justine Wilson was 22 years old when she first met Elon Musk at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, Canada. It was 1990. She was studying English literature, reading novels in the library until they kicked her out at midnight, and writing short stories in her dorm room after that because she could not stop. She believed, the way certain young writers believe with their whole chest, that stories were how human beings made sense of being alive. Elon was a transfer student from South Africa. He was intense in a way that filled rooms without trying to. He talked about rockets and sustainable energy and the future of the human species in conversations that were supposed to be about something smaller, and people would either lean in or quietly back away. Most people backed away. Justine leaned in. Their first date, which Justine later wrote about honestly in a personal essay for Marie Claire magazine, did not happen. Elon had asked her for ice cream and then forgotten to show up. He had been in the middle of a problem, some calculation, some idea that had grabbed him and wouldn't let go, and the date had simply ceased to exist in his mind, while the problem was there. Most girls would have ended it there. Justine was not most girls. She found him again. She told him plainly that forgetting someone existed was not a foundation she was interested in building on. He listened. He heard her. That was one of the things she noticed early. When something mattered enough, he heard it completely. They found their way to each other slowly, and then all at once. The way things happen when two people are both stubborn and curious, and cannot stop having one more conversation. They fell in love. By February 1999, Elon had sold his first company, Zip2, to Compaq for over $300 million. But he was 27 years old and had more money than either of them knew how to hold in their minds. He bought a McLaren F1, one of the fastest cars ever made at the time, and picked Justine up in it to surprise her, because he was the kind of person who did not do things halfway and probably never would. They married on January 10, 2000, in a quiet ceremony in Windsor, Ontario. Elon wore a tuxedo that looked like it was arguing with him. Justine wore a simple dress. The photographs from that day show two young people standing close together, squinting slightly in the winter light outside the venue, both of them smiling in the slightly disbelieving way of people who are happy and know it and are a little afraid of that knowledge. They moved to California. Elon started X.com, which became PayPal, which he sold to eBay in 2002 for $1.5 billion. He poured $100 million of his own money into a new company called SpaceX because he had decided, with the same absolute seriousness with which he decided everything, that humanity needed to become a multi-planetary species, and that if no one else was going to make that happen, then he would simply have to do it himself. Justine was writing her first novel. Her own world was being built sentence by sentence in a quiet room, while her husband built his in rocket fuel and engineering calculations. They were different people who had found each other anyway. For a while, that felt like enough. And then, in the spring of 2002, everything changed. Their first son, Nevada Alexander Musk, was born on May 12, 2002. He was healthy, small and red-faced, and extraordinary in the specific way that all newborns are extraordinary. Those impossible tiny fingers, the way their whole face reacts to sound, the way they smell like something that has just arrived from somewhere else. Elon held him in the hospital and looked at him the way first-time fathers look at their first child. Like the rest of the world has simultaneously gotten smaller and more important than it has ever been. 10 weeks later, Nevada died. Sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS. The words are clinical and flat and do absolutely nothing to describe what they contain. There is no warning. There is no reason that holds up. A baby simply stops breathing while the world continues around him, and by the time anyone knows, it is already far too late, and nothing that comes after is ever exactly the same. Justine found him. That is a sentence that should be allowed to stand alone. Some grief belongs only to the person who lived it, and the details of that morning in 2002 are hers and not anyone else's to describe or imagine or put into words. What can be said is that the world she woke up to that day was permanently different from the world she had gone to sleep in, and so was the world Elon woke up to. The question, the one that would take 22 years to fully answer, was what each of them did with that difference. What Justine did was grieve openly. She cried in front of people. She talked about Nevada by name. She lit a candle on his birthday every year and sat with it and let herself feel the full weight of what his absence meant. She believed, because she was a storyteller, and storytellers understand this instinctively, that the only way through pain is directly through it, that you cannot go around it, that going around it only means you arrive at the other side carrying everything you refuse to feel, and it is heavier then, not lighter. What Elon did was go back to work. 3 weeks after Nevada died, he was in the SpaceX facility in El Segundo, California, standing over engineering schematics for the Falcon 1 rocket. His team noticed that he looked tired. Nobody said anything about why. That was not the kind of workplace where personal things were discussed. It was the kind of workplace where the mission was everything, where the work was always the answer to whatever question was being asked. People who observed Elon from the outside during those months after Nevada's death drew the easy conclusion that he was cold. See, that he didn't feel it the way a normal person would, that the emotional range required to lose a child and then show up to discuss rocket thrust ratios 3 weeks later was simply not something he possessed. That conclusion was wrong, but it was understandable. The truth was more private than that. Elon Musk had grown up in Pretoria, South Africa, in a household that was not gentle. His parents, Errol and May Musk, divorced when he was 8 years old. His father, by most accounts, including Elon's own, was a difficult and sometimes cruel man. Elon had been badly bullied at school. He was small for his age and bookish, and could not find a social current to swim in. So he had gone inward instead, into books and computers and the enormous private world of his own thinking. He had learned, young, sure that the inner world was safer than the outer one. He had learned that feeling things in front of other people was a kind of exposure, and exposure was dangerous. He had learned to put the hard things somewhere deep and keep moving, because keeping moving was the only way he had ever found to survive anything. Nevada's death hit that deep place. It hit it with full force. But the deep place had walls that had been built over decades, and nobody, not Justine, not a therapist, not anyone, fully got through them. This was not a choice he made consciously. It was a pattern so old it had become invisible to him, and it cost them everything. Justine wrote later, carefully, without cruelty, about what those years felt like from her side of the marriage. She wrote about going to dinner parties in Silicon Valley where the rooms were full of brilliant, powerful people, and feeling herself becoming a supporting character in someone else's story. She wrote about the way Elon would sometimes refer to her in ways that reduced her, not out of malice exactly, but out of a habit of seeing himself as the center of gravity around which everything else orbited. She wrote about asking him, at a party in 2003, to stop introducing her in a way that felt diminishing. About how he had looked at her with complete seriousness and said, "I am the alpha in this relationship." She had smiled. She had let it pass. She had added it to the pile of things she was letting pass, which was growing heavier every year. By 2006 and 2007, SpaceX was failing. 3 rocket launches failed between 2006 and 2008. And the first 3 Falcon 1 launches, which had consumed years of work and hundreds of millions of dollars, ended in disaster. Tesla was burning money at a rate that kept Elon awake through most of the night. He was borrowing money from friends to cover his own salary. He later said, in a 2017 interview with Rolling Stone, that those years brought him closer to a breakdown than any other period of his life. He was running on fury and caffeine and the terrifying knowledge that if he stopped moving, everything would collapse. Justine was in the same house, raising their 5 sons, Griffin and Xavier, the twins born in 2004, and Kai, Saxon, and Damien, the triplets born in 2006, and feeling increasingly alone inside a marriage that looked, from the outside, like a life most people would envy. They tried therapy. The therapist, now a woman in Bel Air with a calm office and a gift for sitting with uncomfortable silences, saw what was happening clearly. 2 people who had survived an unsurvivable loss by going in completely opposite directions and had never found their way back to the same place afterward. In 2008, Elon filed for divorce. He filed, not her. That detail rearranges the shape of the story in ways that are hard to explain but easy to feel, if you have ever been the one who did not choose the ending. The divorce was painful. It was public in ways that private pain should never have to be. There were lawyers and arguments, and a prenuptial agreement that Justine felt was deeply unfair, and the particular indignity of having to translate the end of a love story into legal language. Their 5 boys would grow up moving between 2 houses. And somewhere in the chaos of lawyers and paperwork and division of assets, a small fireproof safe got packed into a moving box. Inside it was something Elon had never mentioned, something he did not yet know how to give back. And so it stayed. Locked. Moved from house to house across 17 years, like a wound that had been bandaged but never properly treated. While Justine built a new life on one side of the country, and Elon built newer and larger versions of his life on the other, the small fireproof safe traveled quietly with him, never opened, never discussed, waiting with the particular patience of objects that belong to the past. Justine did not know it existed. That is the part that matters most. She had spent 22 years not knowing. Well, she had spent those years doing what people do when the life they planned turns out to be something else entirely. She moved into a house in Bel Air. She raised 5 boys who were loud and smart and needed her in all the ways that children need their mothers, practically, constantly, completely. She wrote her 2nd novel, then her 3rd. She built a career on her own terms, in her own name, which was a thing she had not fully had during the marriage and did not take for granted after it. She dated occasionally, without much enthusiasm. The men she met in Los Angeles were either too impressed by her history or not interested in it at all, and neither version led anywhere real. There were dinners that went nowhere. There was one relationship in 2014 that lasted 8 months and ended kindly. The two people who liked each other well enough but did not love each other, which is its own quiet kind of sad. She was not desperate. She was not broken. She was a woman in her 40s who had survived enormous things and built something genuinely good out of the wreckage. And she knew that. And it was enough. But enough is not the same as everything. And then, on a Tuesday evening in October 2022, Priya Anand, her closest friend since their first year at Queen's University, a woman who had held Justine's hand through every major event of her adult life and was constitutionally incapable of letting her sit still for too long, invited her to a dinner party in Santa Monica at the home of a documentary filmmaker they both knew. There were 12 people at the table. Justine sat across from a man named Marcus Elijah Hale. Marcus was 48 years old. He was an architect based in Denver who designed public buildings, libraries, community centers, schools, in neighborhoods that needed them and could not always afford them. He was tall, with the kind of unhurried physical presence that comes from a person who has never felt the need to take up more space than they actually occupy. He had dark eyes and a way of listening that was so complete and so focused that it felt, when he turned it on you, like being the only person in a very large room. He had no idea who Elon Musk was in any personal sense. He knew the name. He had watched SpaceX launches on his laptop and found them extraordinary. He did not follow celebrity news. He was not on social media in any meaningful way. He had a professional Instagram for his architecture firm, Hale and Morales, and that he posted on approximately 4 times a year, and which had photographs of buildings and blueprints and nothing else. When Justine mentioned, about 40 minutes into dinner, that her ex-husband was Elon Musk, Marcus had paused for just a moment. Not a frozen, starstruck pause. A thoughtful one. The pause of a man filing information away carefully before responding. Then he had said, simply, and without theater, "That must have been a complicated life." 7 words. Not, "Oh my God, what was he like?" Not, "Did you know about Tesla before it was big?" Not the 20 questions that everyone else had always asked, that turned her history into a trivia game and turned her into a footnote in someone else's story. Just, "That must have been a complicated life." And Justine had picked up her wine glass and looked at this man she had known for less than an hour, and something shifted in her chest. Quietly. The way tectonic plates shift. Nothing visible on the surface, but everything rearranging itself underneath. She told Priya about it on the phone that night, from the car on the way home. "He asked what my books were about," she said. "That's normal," Priya said. "He had already read one of them," Justine said. "He read it 3 years ago. He remembered the ending." Priya was quiet for a moment. "Okay," Priya said. "That's not normal." They went on a first date the following week, then a second, then a third that was not supposed to be a date, but became one anyway. The way evenings become something more than planned when the right 2 people are inside them. Marcus was patient. He was steady. And he was the kind of man who remembered small things. The name of her editor, the title of the book she mentioned she was struggling with, the fact that she took her coffee with oat milk and 1 sugar and no more. He was, in every way that mattered, and in several ways she had not known to look for, exactly what came after surviving everything she had survived. She just didn't know yet that the past was not entirely finished with her. But that was tomorrow's knowledge. And on the evening of March 14th, 2025, the night before her wedding, Justine sat in the bathtub of her 4th-floor suite at the Broadmoor Hotel in Colorado Springs and felt, for the first time in longer than she could accurately measure, completely at peace. The suite had floor-to-ceiling windows that faced the Rocky Mountains. The Broadmoor sat at the base of Cheyenne Mountain, tucked against the rock like something that had grown there rather than been built. And at night, the mountains were black shapes against a deep navy sky, enormous and permanent and indifferent to weddings and divorces and all the small human dramas that played out at their feet. Justine found that indifference comforting. The mountains did not care about her history. They had been there before her and would be there long after. And in that context, everything that had hurt her felt appropriately sized, small enough to survive, which she had. She went to bed at 10:30. She slept without difficulty, which surprised her. She had expected to lie awake the way people lie awake before important days, running through everything that could go wrong and a few things that couldn't. Instead, she fell asleep quickly and dreamed something formless and warm that she couldn't remember in the morning. Only the feeling of it. She woke at 6, before her alarm. She made coffee from the machine on the bathroom counter, the small indignity of hotel coffee that not even the Broadmoor had fully solved, and carried it to the armchair by the window and sat in the gray pre-dawn light and looked at the mountains. She thought about her sons. Griffin and Xavier were 21 now, the twins, her first babies after Nevada, the children she had brought home from the hospital, holding each of them against her chest in the specific terrified way of a mother who has already lost one and understands for the rest of her life what loss actually means. They were men now. Griffin was studying environmental science at UC Santa Barbara. So Xavier was doing something complicated with digital media that Justine only partially understood, but supported completely. They were here, down the hall, probably awake until 2 in the morning, talking the way they had been talking since they were old enough to form sentences, finishing each other's thoughts, arguing about nothing, laughing about everything. Kai, Saxon, and Damien, the triplets, 19 years old, miraculous and exhausting in the way that triplets are miraculous and exhausting, were in the room beside them. Kai would be reading. Saxon would be on his phone watching something with his headphones in. Damien would be fully asleep in whatever position he had landed in, shoes still on, because Damien had the rare and enviable gift of being able to fall asleep anywhere, at any time in any configuration. A talent that had not diminished at all between infancy and adulthood. She thought about Marcus, 1 floor below her. He had texted her at 11 the previous night. Not a long message. Just, "Mountain looks incredible from down here. See you tomorrow. I love you." She had read it 4 times and then put her phone face down on the nightstand because the feeling it produced was too large to look at directly before sleep. She thought about Nevada. She always thought about Nevada on the days that mattered. She had made peace with that. Not the loss itself, which you never make peace with, but the thinking about it. The way he appeared in her mind on first days and last days and all the important days in between. Today, he would have been 22 years old. She sat with that number for a moment and let herself imagine it. A young man, probably taller than her, maybe with Elon's jaw and her eyes, maybe the other way around. She would never know, and she had learned slowly and imperfectly across 2 decades to hold the not knowing without letting it hollow her out. She loved him. He had been here. That was real, regardless of how brief. She set her coffee down at 7:30 and got up because the mountains were beginning to glow pink at their tops as the sun came over the eastern plains, and the day was beginning whether she was ready or not. And she was ready. At 9:15, Priya knocked. She came in carrying a bakery bag and wearing a silk robe with an expression of barely contained excitement that she had been wearing since Marcus proposed, and showed no signs of retiring. "It snowed last night," Priya said, gesturing at the windows where a fine layer of white sat on the window ledges and the paths below. "Just a little. Just enough to make it look like an actual movie." "You said that already," Justine said. "Last night on the phone." "It bears repeating," Priya said. "Sit down. Eat something. Donna arrives at 10. Donna was the hairstylist, a woman with 20 years of editorial experience and a laugh that could fill aircraft hangars. Felix, the makeup artist, arrived at 10:15, quiet and precise, moving around Justine with the careful economy of someone who understood that his job was to make her look like herself, only more so. At 11:30, all 5 of her sons crowded into the suite's living room for photographs. Lena Park, the photographer, had done 50 weddings and understood instinctively that the best photographs are never the posed ones. She moved around the room like water while Griffin draped his arm over Xavier's shoulder, and the triplets arranged themselves by some internal logic that only the 3 of them understood, and Justine stood in the middle of her sons in her cream silk dress and felt the full, almost unbearable rightness of the moment. "You look beautiful, Mom," Kai said. He was the one who said things like that without embarrassment. It was one of her very favorite things about him. "Don't make me cry," she said. "Felix will fix it," Damien said, pointing at the makeup artist, who smiled quietly from his corner without looking up. At 12:45, guests began filling the ballroom downstairs. At 1 o'clock, the string quartet took their positions, and the snow outside had stopped. The mountains behind the Broadmoor had turned from pink to white to the particular blinding bright that Colorado mountains become when the midday sun hits fresh snow. And the lake beside the hotel was flat and silver and completely still. At 1:15, Marcus was at the altar. At 1:20, the doors at the back of the ballroom were opened for Justine. At 1:22, a side door near the coat check opened quietly, and everything that was supposed to happen next stopped being the thing that happened next. The side door was not a door that guests used. It was a staff entrance near the coat check, set into the wall at an angle that made it easy to miss if you were not looking for it. It opened without a sound, and the man who came through it did not announce himself. He did not pause dramatically in the frame, did not do any of the things that a person does when they want to be seen. He was already moving by the time the first person noticed him. That first person was Claire Whitfield, a novelist who had known Justine for 15 years and was sitting in the 3rd row from the back on the left side of the aisle. Claire had been watching the doors at the far end of the ballroom, waiting for Justine to appear, when something in her peripheral vision shifted. She turned her head. She looked at the man who had just come through the side door. She looked at him for 2 full seconds before her brain completed the recognition. Then she grabbed her husband David's arm with both hands. David turned. He looked. He opened his mouth. He closed it again. And the violinist in the string quartet was the second person to see him. She was closest to that side of the room, and her sightline was clear, and she had watched enough television to know exactly who she was looking at. Her bow stopped mid-stroke. The note she had been playing died in the air. One by one, the other musicians followed, the way candles go out in a draft. Not all at once, but in quick succession, each one catching what the previous one had caught. Within 4 seconds, the canon had stopped entirely, and the silence that replaced it was so sudden and so complete that people in the middle of whispered conversations stopped mid-sentence because the silence reached them before the reason for it did. 312 people turned their heads. What they saw was a man in a navy suit carrying a small wooden box. He walking slowly along the left side of the ballroom toward the altar. He was not looking at them. He was not performing anything for them. He was moving with the focused deliberateness of someone who has decided on something and is now simply doing it. And the doing of it requires all of his attention. The reactions moved through the room in waves. Near the back, confusion. People craning to see, whispering, reaching the recognition at different speeds, depending on how closely they followed technology news or read business magazines or watched the kind of television that covers the lives of very famous people. In the middle, a sharper recognition and with it a particular suspended quality, like the whole room was holding one collective breath. A woman named Sandra, not Marcus's aunt from Albuquerque, who had never once in her 63 years expected to be in the same room as this person, pressed her hand flat against her chest without realizing she had done it. Near the front, where Justine's closest friends and family were seated, the reaction was different from all of these. It was not confusion, and it was not star-struck suspension. It was something more complicated and more protective. Priya, who had walked Justine to the back of the ballroom to prepare for her entrance, was not in her seat. But Justine's editor, a woman named Barbara Sung, who had worked with her for 11 years and knew more about her life than most people, went very still in the way that people go still when they are deciding whether they need to do something. At the altar, Marcus watched him come. Marcus's hands had been perfectly steady all morning. His best man Teo had remarked on it twice, genuinely astonished, because Teo himself had been crying since the processional music started and could not seem to stop. But now Marcus's hands were still in a different way. Not relaxed. Still. The stillness of a man who is taking in information before deciding what to do with it. He watched Elon walk the length of the room. He looked at the wooden box. He looked at the man's face, which was composed but not comfortable, the face of someone doing something difficult because they have decided it is necessary. Elon stopped at the edge of the altar. He did not step onto the raised platform. He stood at the bottom of it and looked up at Marcus. For a moment, the two men simply looked at each other. Marcus Hale, steady, careful. A man who built things meant to last, and Elon Musk, restless, extraordinary. A man who had never in his life been in a room without becoming the center of it, though not always by choice. "I'm sorry," Elon said. His voice was clear and level. The room was so quiet that all 312 people heard it without straining. "I know this is not what you planned today. I know I am not supposed to be here." He paused for just a fraction of a second. "I'm not going to stay. I just need to give something to Justine. Then I'll go." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. No one in the room breathed. "What's in the box?" Marcus asked. The question was quiet, not aggressive, not territorial, just direct, the way Marcus was always direct. And because he was a man who believed that the fastest way to understand a situation was to ask the most important question first. Elon looked down at the wooden box in his hands. Something moved across his face. Not quite grief, not quite relief. Something that lived between those two things, in the territory that doesn't have a clean name. "Something that belongs to her," he said. "Something I should have given her a long time ago." Marcus was quiet for what felt, to everyone watching, like a very long time. Then he turned. He looked down the length of the ballroom to where Justine was standing at the back of the room, in her cream silk dress, her bouquet of white ranunculus held against her chest, Priya's hand on her arm. He looked at her face. The face of the woman he was going to marry in the next 10 minutes. Oh, if the next 10 minutes went the way they were supposed to go. The face of a woman who had already been through more than most people survive, and had survived it all anyway, and was standing here, in this room, in this dress, because she had chosen to try again. He gave her the smallest nod. It said everything it needed to say without a single word. It said, "I trust you. I am not afraid. Do what you need to do." And Justine, who had chosen this man precisely because of moments like this one, who had known from the very beginning that his steadiness was not absence of feeling, but the deepest kind of strength, took one breath and walked forward. The room watched her come. Not the way a room watches a bride walk toward her groom, with warmth and anticipation and the comfortable sentimentality of a moment everyone has been waiting for. And this was different. This was the way people watch something they do not fully understand and cannot look away from. 312 people sat completely motionless as Justine walked the length of her own wedding aisle toward her ex-husband, her bouquet still in her hands, her dress catching the light from the chandeliers above in soft, moving waves. Nobody whispered. Nobody shifted in their seat. Even the children in the back rows, who had been restless and fidgeting all morning with the particular restlessness of small people trapped in formal clothes, went still without being told to. Justine stopped in front of Elon. They were close enough now that only the people in the first two rows could hear what passed between them. Everyone else would piece it together afterward, from fragments, from lip reading, so from the expressions on the faces of those close enough to catch it. What those people in the first two rows heard was this. Elon looked at Justine for a moment without speaking. He was holding the wooden box with both hands, and she could see now, this close, that his knuckles were pale against the wood, that his jaw was set in the way it set, when he was controlling something he didn't want anyone to see him feeling. She had known that jaw for decades. She knew exactly what it meant. "I found the tape," he said. 3 words, quiet enough that even Barbara Sung, sitting in the third seat of the first row, only caught them because the room was so absolutely silent. And Justine understood immediately, before he said another word, before any explanation. The understanding moved through her the way cold water moves, all at once, everywhere, see, complete. Because there was only one tape. There had only ever been one tape. In the summer of 2002, 6 weeks before Nevada died, Elon had taken a video camera from the closet of their house in Los Angeles. It was a small Sony Handycam, the kind people used in the early 2000s before phones made cameras redundant. He had set it on the kitchen counter, pointing it at the bouncy seat where Nevada was sitting on a Tuesday afternoon in late July. Nevada had been awake, 10 weeks old, which is the age when babies begin to truly notice the world. When their eyes start to focus and track movement, when they turn toward voices, when their faces begin to hint at the expressions that will eventually become their expressions, the specific face that will be theirs and no one else's for the rest of their life. Elon had stood slightly off to the side of the camera and made sounds. Soft, nonsense sounds. The kinds of sounds that fathers make at babies when no one else is watching and there is no one to perform competence for. Low hums and clicks and gentle words that meant nothing and everything. The sounds of a person completely unguarded, completely present, wanting nothing from the moment except the moment itself. Nevada had turned his head toward the sound, and his face had done something. Not quite a smile. Real smiles come later, at 12 weeks, when the brain has caught up enough to connect happiness to the muscles that show it. But almost. The corners of his mouth had moved. His eyes had found his father's voice, and his whole small body had oriented toward it, the way sunflowers orient toward light, and with the pure, unthinking instinct of a living thing moving toward warmth. 3 minutes and 47 seconds. That was how long the camera had run before the battery warning light blinked on, and Elon had noticed and turned it off. Justine had been in the other room the entire time. She did not know the camera had been on. She did not know the footage existed. When Nevada died 2 weeks later, Elon had found the camera in a drawer while looking for something else entirely, and had seen the small red indicator light that meant recording, and had sat down on the kitchen floor of the house where his son had lived and died, and had watched 3 minutes and 47 seconds of the most important footage in the world. Then he had put the tape in the small fireproof safe in his office. He had not told Justine. He could not explain, then or later, fully and satisfactorily. Why? The reasons shifted, depending on when he examined them. In the beginning, he had told himself it would make her grief worse, that she had enough to carry. Later, he wondered if he had been unable to give it away, because giving it away meant sharing the last private thing he had of his son, and some part of him had not been ready to share it. Later still, during the divorce, when the lawyers and the arguments had built walls between them that words couldn't easily cross, there had simply been no way to say, "In the middle of all of this, I need to tell you that I have 3 minutes and 47 seconds of Nevada that you have never seen." It did not fit inside that conversation. Nothing that fragile fits inside that conversation. So the safe had traveled with him. From Los Angeles to Bel Air to Boca Chica, Texas, where SpaceX had built its launch facility on the Gulf Coast. Through relationships and companies and launches and failures, and the accumulation of a public life so large and so loud that the private things inside it became harder and harder to find. And then, in December 2024, an assistant had been cataloging items for a facility move and had asked about the contents of a small fireproof safe in the corner of Elon's private office. Elon had said, very quietly, "Don't touch it." That night he had gone home and opened it himself for the first time in over 20 years. He had watched the tape. He had sat alone in a room. No assistant, no security, no one. And watched his son turn toward his voice. And the thing he had been carrying for 22 years broke open inside him the way things break when they have been held together by force for too long. He had cried, fully, without managing it or minimizing it, the way he had not allowed himself to cry in 2002 because stopping had felt like drowning. The next morning, he had transferred the footage carefully to a USB drive. He had labeled it in black marker in his own handwriting. He had placed it in a small wooden box, a watch box originally from some award ceremony he could no longer remember, and sanded the wood smooth and fitted it with a brass latch. He had thought about mailing it. He had thought about having someone deliver it. He had written and deleted 4 different letters that were supposed to explain it. In the end, he had driven himself to Colorado Springs on the morning of March 15, 2025, because he understood, finally, that some things cannot be mailed. Some things you have to put into someone's hands yourself and let them take the weight of it. Now, he held the box out to Justine with both hands. She took it. She did not open it. She pressed it against her chest with both arms, the bouquet crushed softly between the box and her dress, and she looked at her ex-husband, this complicated, extraordinary, difficult, brilliant man who had been her entire world once, who had given her 5 sons and one grief too enormous to name. And now, 22 years later, this, and she cried. Not performed crying, not the delicate, photogenic crying of a movie, the real kind. The kind that comes from a place so deep that it arrives before you have decided to let it. "Thank you," she said. It came out as barely sound. Elon nodded once, a single careful nod. He turned to Marcus, who was standing at the altar watching with the steady, open expression of a man who understood that he was witnessing something that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the woman he loved. "Take care of her," Elon said. Marcus held his gaze. "You don't need to say anything," Elon said, before Marcus could speak. "I can already see that you do." He turned. He walked back down the aisle, the room parting for him without anyone deciding to part. At the side door near the coat check, he stopped. He looked back once, at the white roses and the eucalyptus, at the mountains glowing through the tall windows, and at Justine standing in the center of the ballroom holding the wooden box against her chest. He looked at her for just a moment. Then the door closed behind him, and the room, which had been holding its breath for 4 minutes and 30 seconds, finally let it go. Not all at once, in stages, like pressure releasing from something that had been sealed too long. First a sound, not quite a word, not quite a sob, somewhere between the two, from somewhere in the middle rows. Then a ripple of exhaled breath moving forward through the room. Then Sandra, Marcus's aunt from Albuquerque, pressed her handkerchief to her mouth. Then Barbara Sung, Justine's editor of 11 years, put her face in her hands, not to hide, but because there was simply nowhere else to put what she was feeling. By the time the side door had fully closed behind Elon, at least 40 people in that ballroom were crying without entirely knowing why. Priya appeared at Justine's side. She did not say anything. She took the wooden box gently from Justine's arms, carefully with both hands, the way you take something irreplaceable from someone who needs their hands free, and tucked it under her own arm. Then she looked at Justine's face. Felix materialized from somewhere near the second row. He moved quickly and quietly, the way he always moved, and did something precise and swift with a small brush and a folded cloth that restored Justine's face to itself in under 45 seconds. He stepped back. He nodded once. He returned to his seat without a word, because he understood that his job right now was to be invisible. "Ready?" Priya said. Justine took one breath, then another. She squared her shoulders in the small, deliberate way she had. A gesture Priya had seen her make before every reading, every interview, every hard conversation she had walked into across 25 years of friendship. The gesture that meant, "I am here, I am present. Let's go." "Ready?" Justine said. The string quartet, who had been sitting motionless with their instruments in their laps, waiting, watching, completely uncertain of their role in what had just unfolded, looked to their leader, the violinist, who gave a small nod. They lifted their bows. They found the music again. Not Pachelbel this time. Yo-Yo Ma, Bach's Cello Suite No. 1, the Prelude. A recording that Marcus and Justine had listened to together on a drive through Rocky Mountain National Park in the summer of 2023, and had talked about for an hour. What it felt like, why it moved people, what it was about the cello specifically that sounded like a human voice trying to say something language couldn't hold. They had chosen it for this moment because it was theirs, because it had belonged to them before it belonged to the wedding. When the first note filled the room, 3 people in the front rows cried harder. Justine walked. She walked the length of the ballroom that she had already walked once today, in the wrong direction, for reasons no one had planned. But this walk was different from that one in every way that mattered. Her head was up. Her shoulders were back. Now she was carrying something invisible alongside the wooden box that Priya carried for her. Something that had been missing for 22 years and had been returned to her 4 minutes ago and was now settling into its proper place inside her, finding the space that had always been shaped exactly like it. She was not just a bride walking toward her groom. She was a woman walking toward the rest of her life, with everything she needed, finally in her arms. Marcus watched her come. When she reached him, he reached out and took both her hands. He looked at her face, the full, complicated, luminous face of a woman who had just been through something and was still standing. And he did not ask about it. He did not need to. He held her hands and he was steady, the way he was always steady. And that steadiness was not nothing. But it was not a small thing. It was the thing she had chosen and the thing she needed, and it was right there, right now, exactly where it was supposed to be. Judge Rosalind Chen, who had married hundreds of couples across 20 years on the family court bench in Denver and believed she had seen every possible version of a wedding, took a quiet breath and smiled and began. The ceremony was 22 minutes long. When Marcus said "I do," his voice did not waver by a single degree. When Justine said "I do," her voice broke softly on the second word, just for a fraction of a second, just enough to be human. And then it steadied, and she finished it clearly. And the room answered with a sound that was not quite applause and not quite a sigh, but was something that contained both. And Judge Chen said, "You may kiss the bride." Marcus held Justine's face in both hands, the way people do when they want to be completely present, when they want the moment to exist fully and not rush past into the next one. He kissed her slowly. The room came apart. Griffin and Xavier cheered with the full-throated enthusiasm of young men who had waited their whole lives to see their mother this happy. Kai put 2 fingers in his mouth and whistled. Saxon stood and clapped. Damien, who had been stoic all morning in the particular way of teenagers who feel things deeply and would rather combust than show it, pressed his lips together hard and looked at the ceiling and then gave up and laughed. Theo, Marcus's best man, had been crying since Pachelbel and simply continued. The reception lasted 4 hours. There was dancing. Well, there was roasted lamb and a wedding cake of lemon and lavender buttercream that people talked about for weeks afterward. Marcus's sister Diane gave a speech that moved from hilarious to devastating in the space of 3 sentences. Priya gave a speech about Justine that she had been writing and rewriting for 6 months and could not finish. She stopped 2 sentences from the end and simply held the microphone and looked at her best friend and shrugged at the room. And the room loved her completely for it. Griffin and Xavier spoke together, trading lines the way they had been trading everything since birth. Xavier said the last thing quietly, looking directly at his mother. "You taught us that love is worth trying again even after it has cost you everything. Thank you for showing us that before we needed to know it." At the table nearest the dance floor, between the empty dessert plates and the half-filled glasses and the scattered petals from the centerpieces, Priya had set the wooden box. It sat there all evening. Justine glanced at it, the way you glance at something that is both precious and almost too much to look at directly. At 11:15, when the last guests had gone and the band had packed their instruments and the ballroom was being quietly reset by the hotel staff, Justine and Marcus went upstairs to the suite. Marcus stood at the window looking at the lake below, dark and still and silver at the edges where the exterior lights reached it. Justine sat on the end of the bed in her dress and set the wooden box in her lap and opened the brass latch. Though the USB drive was small and silver, the handwriting on it was in black marker, slightly hurried, unmistakably his. Nevada, July 2002. She held it between 2 fingers and looked at it for a long time. Marcus came and sat beside her without being asked. He did not put his arm around her. He simply sat close enough that she could feel his presence, warm and solid and there, the way the mountains were there, not solving anything, not explaining anything, just present and immovable in all the right ways. "Tomorrow," she said finally. Her voice was soft, not sad, tender. The voice of someone handling something that deserves to be handled carefully. "Tomorrow," Marcus said. She placed the USB drive back in the box and closed the latch and set it on the nightstand beside her wedding bouquet. She leaned into Marcus and he put his arm around her then, and they stayed like that, looking out at the dark lake and the mountains beyond it, black and enormous and still, for a long time without speaking. She was thinking about a Tuesday afternoon in late July 2002. A kitchen counter, a small camera, a man who did not know he was being recorded making soft sounds at his son, a baby turning his head toward a voice, a face doing something that was almost a smile. Tomorrow, she would press play. Tomorrow, she would see her son's face move. She would hear the room he had lived in. She would have 3 minutes and 47 seconds of him that she had not known existed this morning and would carry for the rest of her life. But tonight, she sat in the mountains with her husband's arm around her and the box on the nightstand and all 5 of her sons sleeping down the hall, and she let herself feel the full, staggering weight of what this day had been. Outside, the snow on the mountains held its light even in the dark. The lake below was perfectly still, and somewhere in the quiet of that room, 22 years of not knowing finally had somewhere to rest. And that was the end of this story. A wooden box, 3 minutes and 47 seconds. 22 years of waiting, and one man who finally found the courage to return something that was never truly his to keep. Some gifts cannot be wrapped. Some apologies do not come in words. And some people find their way back to each other, not as lovers, or not as partners, but as 2 human beings who once shared the most irreplaceable thing in the world and never forgot it. We hope this story moved you the way it moved us. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city, your country, your corner of the world in the comments below. We read every single one, and there is something beautiful about knowing how far these stories travel. If this story touched your heart, give this video a like. It takes 1 second, and it means everything to this channel. Subscribe if you haven't already, so you never miss a story like this one. We bring you real emotions, real humanity, and real moments that remind us what actually matters. And we do it every single week. And finally, share this video with someone who needs it today. A friend, a family member, someone who has been carrying something heavy. Because sometimes the right story, at the right moment, reminds us that it is never too late to do the right thing. We will see you in the next one.